Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good to have you here. Safe and open at the same time. One Bormans already mentioned two core concepts for this conference. Is it possible? And how exactly? And how should we organize it? I'll be discussing this shortly with 4 university officials, but first I'd like to share a few thoughts with you. We can spend a very long time indeed debating whether it's possible, but the only real answer is we have no choice. Our colleges and universities should be open places where we learn and grow, where we acquire new knowledge, where we experiment with what we have learned, and where we share it with others. But they must also be safe places where we are free to engage in scholarships. Safety and openness go hand in hand. They are not static concepts. They are both directly linked to our goals and to our ambitions. What risks will we encounter as we work towards our goals? Which of those risks are acceptable and which are not? The risks could be small and mundane or major and highly technical. For example, the risks involved in our search for the Higgs boson. When incidents occur in the education sector, people are quick to point the finger at government. What does the minister intend to do about this? A question I really recognize quite well. I sense a taboo or bad luck, so to say, or personal culpability. And this is exactly why so many elaborate sets of rules have been created, all with the aim of mitigating risk. There are now so many rules that we are drafting rules to reduce the number of rules. And the main question is this the right direction? I think it's not. And that's why I think we should discuss the issues on a different level, on the level of higher education's purposes. Our colleges and universities are communities of values and are complex networks at the same time. Places where students, lecturers, professors, advisors, and researchers all make their own contribution to a bigger picture. Places where buildings, laboratories, archives, libraries, and even nuclear reactors are safe places where everyone can work on building the society of tomorrow in a safe and open environment. 4. If there is one sector where the open exchange of thoughts and ideas and engaging in experiments is at the core of its mission, it clearly is in education, and maybe especially in higher education. It is therefore fitting that you have embraced this ambition with this conference as a tangible result. One of the aspects of today's discussions will be the pressing issue of radicalization. Terrorist attacks quickly spring to mind, although there's much more to it than that. When it comes to preventing radicalization, education has a vital role to play by instilling common values. And I'm fully aware of how difficult this problem and challenge is. And I'm aware of the burden it places on educators, and I have tremendous respect and admiration for them. But I'm also aware of a tremendous need for a clear vision and for leadership. This does not mean that we need to draw up some kind of blueprint. Colleges and universities don't all have to do exactly the same thing, as long as there's some kind of benchmark of reference point, because that stimulates the discussion also within the organization and make people know what they have to refer to, that there is an idea or a view they can pose questions about, they can react on, but that stimulates the internal discussion on how to behave. And I think it's crucial for school boards to support educators, So you need a solid foundation from which to start a dialogue in case of a confronting event which creates tensions in the classroom, or in case one feels concerned about a certain student's behavior. This asks for a clear sense of mission and for the right tone at the top. The Paris Declaration, drafted by European Ministers of Education last year, is such a benchmark on a European level. The declaration is about, and I quote, the mobilization of education in favor of safeguarding the shared fundamental values in our societies, such as the freedom of expression, democratic citizenship, and equality. It is important that we discuss the meaning of this declaration and how it can be transferred to our everyday lives. To me, this means acting not out of fear, but always from our sense of mission. Mayor Abu Taleb will shortly discuss what this means for a city like the city of Rotterdam. Everyone has their own role to play in this mission, from IT specialists to healthcare professionals, from dean to student. Later during the breaks, you can get acquainted with 2 student projects that contribute directly to fostering safe and open higher education. The first is the Dare to be Grey campaign, in which students at Utrecht University are taking a clear stand against polarization in society. Their campaign has been so successful that it is now in the worldwide finals of the Facebook peer-to-peer, challenging extremism competition. The second project is an app developed by students at Windesheim University of Applied Sciences. The app enables institutions to send push messages to students and staff in emergency situations with instructions on what to do. Finally, I invite everyone to take part in the discussion and to share their ideas. And of course, we all hope that we will never have to use all the instruments and the good examples I just mentioned. At the same time, we have to be prepared. And that means that we have to have an open discussion about all the challenges and also the threats in our society, while at the same time to keep our institutions open. Each institution, also the institutions represented here, have plenty of expertise on board. So in a way, it's just a matter of finding it and sharing it in the right way. And you can do that today in a lot of workshops. So I would like to say that keep your discussions going and develop them into case studies, for then you're sure to gain new insights. And after all, it's only by joining forces that we will be able to create a safe and open higher education setting that we all aspire to. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I would not like to be the only one talking to you, so I would now like to invite some specialists who are working on this issue on a more day-to-day basis. And I would like to invite at stage Ron Bormans of Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, Marjolein Jansen from de Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, Leendert Klaassen of Stenden University of Applied Sciences, and Elmer Sterken of the University of Groningen. I'm not sure, do you all have a microphone? There's a mic line over there. Oh, okay. Yeah.
There's one coming.
So maybe to start with you, Ron. You already in your presentation said something about the challenge to create a safe but also an open place in your institutions. How do you cope with this tension, and what is, in your opinion, a kind of alarming behavior? I think you have only one mic. I have two. I will give you this one.
I have a mic on my own, on my, how do you call it, the stropdas? A tie, thank you.
I will use this one, and then you can keep.
Okay. Well, I think it's very important to look at these people as people who, in a way, are troubled people. Not only people coming from one kind of ideology, or it's not only radicalization. What we see in this city is that the city as Rotterdam is in a way produces people who can get in trouble, is a kind of safe haven for people who can come in trouble. And I think it's very important that our institutions have the sensibility, have the urgency to try to connect with them, to try to see them, to try to discuss with them. We are a school. Of course, we are higher education, but we are a school. So I try to connect it with the primary task society has given us to educate people. So I would like to lead a University of Applied Sciences with teachers who are interested in young people. And when you're interested in young people, you are a good teacher. But you also can find out from perhaps this one is in trouble. And sometimes it intervenes with young people looking for an identity and young people looking for an ideology. And sometimes it intervenes with people who are wrong and who have values who are contrary to our values. But most of the time it is troubled young people. And I think there's the guy who were on the television, you know, who were threatening those. It was a very intelligent young man. But when I saw that on television, I had the tension to took an arm around him, you know. So I think we have to be alert, we have to be open, but don't be naive.
Yeah, I think this is a very good lesson also, which I drew from a report journalist Margeliet Kleitweg wrote for me about radicalization and the prevention of radicalization at high schools, but also vocational training and universities of applied sciences. And one of her conclusions was that on a one way, teachers and lecturers have to be have to show interest in their students, because if they don't feel that they are taken seriously, we might easily lose them. At the same time, she also was very clear that there are some limits we have to make, and to say there are some things we don't accept about what might be said about the relation between men and women or homosexuals or whatever. So how do you cope as leaders of institutions with, on the one hand, showing interest for your students, and at the same time also be very clear, not to be naive, but also be very clear in what you accept and what you don't accept? Maybe Marjolein Jansen from the Vrije Universiteit, a university that is from all Dutch universities, I think, quite diverse.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I recognize the dilemma. We have in our goals to be the most diverse university, but we also want to have respect. And for instance, the incident in Orlando had questions on homosexuality and the Muslim belief. And can we get the dialogue? And we have some people in the faculties that address these questions, difficult conversations. And I worked before in vocational education, and it's at a university not so different. Also in a university you have young people, insecure people with different backgrounds, with different beliefs. But if you see them, if you address them, if you look at them behaving differently than before, and that's not always extreme, sometimes they can become more open when they're very silent before, or not coming to class. And that's something we say to the teachers, and scientists are also the teachers of these young students, and say, if you address that, and if you have problems, you can come to our Chief Diversity Officer. She's in charge of these diversity issues, and we can help you get this conversation in the classroom. And now, next week, we start to have some conversations and dialogues within the university on the boundaries. What do we accept from your belief, from your faith, and what is freedom of speech and freedom of being? And it's a difficult a dialogue, but it's a dialogue we need to address.
I think that's very important. But you know, one question, because you gave the example of the attacks in Orlando and how students at your university reacted to that. That is a situation that you have no time anymore to prepare the dialogue or to prepare your lectures. So how are you prepared, or what did you do last week when you discovered the kind of reaction resulting from the Orlando attacks?
Well, we are prepared on these difficult situations. Be prepared, not naive, but be open. And so we have an infrastructure already in place where teachers and students can come to. They have these vertrouwenspersonen, people they trust to come with these questions, and they have a set of instruments. And when we listened for the first time for the signals, we have the student union, which is a very important instrument. We asked them, do you hear these same signals? Do you feel that we need to do something? Do we have to have a big meeting or just a small meeting? Do we have to do something on social media? So we asked them to advise us as a board of directors, what is the best way to handle this? Because we have a different perspective than they have, and they advise us on the spot, and then we have this more spontaneous talks in the coffee corners.
Okay. Moving to Leonard from Stenden, also University of Applied Science, but quite internationally. How do you cope with being open and showing interest in global identities on the one hand, and not to be naive on the other hand? And how do you respond also to the recent developments? Because I think you have a long-lasting tradition in international orientation.
We have, and we are very aware of this position. We are also very on the alert in all this kind of developments. To be specific, we also have 4 international branch campus sites abroad. One in Qatar, one in South Africa, one in Bangkok and Bali. But specifically Qatar and South Africa are interesting from a point of view of crisis management, because the safety issue is a real issue there. So we have to be aware of the risks, analyze the risk, manage the risks, and put an organization into place with professionals who know how to act and how to handle situations when the situation arises. But on the other hand, you want to be an open and transparent organization all the time, which means this professional organization is there always present on the background, but not visibly all the time. When we look at situations like radicalization or school shootings, what we do is being very aware of what happens in social media, how students react to each other. We have different groups of international students on the campus. For instance, we have a group of 60 students from Qatar this year who are doing their 60 EC time in the Netherlands, and they're coming from a totally different culture. So they react in a different way on this kind of situations. And we try to keep very alert, be very, talk to them, see what happens, how they look at it. So alertness and awareness are the key words, I would say. And when the incidents really arise, then there should be a professional organization in place who can act swiftly and directly with a mandate that is in place also from the board.
And who is giving the mandate? Because
the
I
board.
think it's very important also to talk about who has to take the responsibility, who is responsible for what kind of acts.
Yeah, in general terms, the executive board is responsible. We practice this kind of situations on a very regular basis. We have our crisis management assessments, you could say. But when the situation arises, there should be responsible people who can act directly, who don't have to wait for orders from above, you could say. So the mandate is there, always present, and people know who should act on the situation given.
Okay. Elmar Sterken, from the University in Groningen, I think one of the most international universities in the Netherlands. How do you cope with this problem and challenge of being open at the one hand and being a real international global university, and on the other hand not to be naive and to know what is at stake?
Yeah, maybe I can explain a little. We do the similar things like my colleagues explained on the, let's say, try to avoid to be naive, like these emergency practices, and from the university board having a kind of crisis team and control team. That's quite similar, I think, to the things that my colleagues explained. But let me try to highlight one of the more, let's say, positive elements that you could also practice if you have a really international student population. So we have a large program at Groningen where we give an emphasis on the inclusion of students. And so we have a big project where we try to take the benefit out of those students in the educational model, try to take account of the heterogeneity in class of student population, and try to activate those students in bringing their own cultures and their own examples into class. And that's a wonderful project, I think, where you try to stimulate the communication that you have with your students. Because I think what we like to do is that these students also share the culture that we have at the university and try to take the benefit of the culture, because being open brings you a lot of success. And I think that's a great project.
Did you learn that project from another university, or?
Yeah, we looked at different international examples. I think for us, some of the Australian universities have been an example, because they're very much used to having large groups of international students around. So we also formed a team of international experts that gives us advice, let's say, how to run a project like this, because it's kind of new to the Netherlands, I would say.
Yeah, but this is in a way a project, if I understand it correctly, that you want to stimulate an open attitude among your students. Or is it also, can you also see it as a way of kind of peer-to-peer control?
Yeah, basically it's both. I think it's what we try to do is first to illustrate that there are cultural differences among students, among different nationalities, among different groups of students, and try to be aware of these differences. Maybe also helping a little with the language, because language is really at the core of culture. And then as soon as you have taken that step, you can move into the activation of students and activation in your educational model. So it's very nice to have a class where students bring in their own example cases from back home. So they become more interested, they become more enthusiastic about the issues, and I think the other students can learn from these examples. So you really have a kind of international melting pot, bringing the best to the fore.
Yeah. This is the positive side of the whole debate on globalization, internationalization, and also to learn from each other. But of course, there are also some risks. Maybe I don't know who wants to respond, but my question would be, if we want to be open and if we want to be international and keep staying open and international, what do we accept as a risk? Because in a way, you cannot have it both in the same standard. You cannot be 100% open and 100% safe. So how do you cope with that? Do you accept that there are some risks? You know you cannot prevent because you choose to be an open institute, or the other way around?
Yeah, I think if I may respond, we have to avoid systematic risk. So if you can predict, so to say, the risk cases, then you should try to avoid it. But the idiosyncratic risk you can't avoid. So there can always be an individual in our model, in your university model, that becomes a risk, I think, and you have to accept that. as long as you're aware.
Would one of you accept that your institutes can only be entered by safety doors and safety checks?
I would not accept it in the Netherlands, but I do accept it in South Africa, for instance.
Okay.
It's a clear answer, I think.
And why do you accept it in South Africa?
Because the safety risks are totally different compared with the Netherlands. There's a lot of theft around. There's a lot of people walking around the campus, looking inside to try to get something out. So for the protection of our students and of our material, we have to do it. It's no other way.
Are there other things you would accept in also in the standards in the count of boundaries or limits you state as a university? Do you, for example, accept other opinions on homosexuality in Qatar than you do in the Netherlands among your students?
Yeah, I think it's part of the culture in Qatar that they speak about it differently. But there is a place for homosexuals there, so it can be, it's accepted in the school. But you can see that the community in Qatar and around school will act differently on it than in the Netherlands. There's no way, that's absolutely clear.
Yeah, but
interesting thing is, when they come to the Netherlands for the 60 ECs, they are a year in the Netherlands, and what you see there is there's a kind of a cultural shock initially, and then a cultural development, you could say, an acceptance of things that are different. So for the students, it's a very interesting experience to come here for a year and see how a different society works.
And Ron Bormans, being the president of the University of Applied Science in a very international city, how do you look to the challenge of being open and safe at the same time? And what would you accept as a kind of risks to stay open? So how do you how do you see your students, or how do you see your lecturers? For example, if you have a lecturer from Pakistan or wherever, is to say your reaction. This is interesting because this brings other kind of knowledge in the house than we already have. Or would your reaction be, or maybe all our reactions, maybe we also have a kind of implicit bias in this. Is this person a researcher, or is it one of radical agencies?
That's a tough one, this one. First of all, I would like to comment on the last part, because I think we should we much more than we do now discuss these basic values within our institutions. We have forgotten, I think, a little to discuss those basic values as how we cope with people who have different opinions about homosexuality, the relationship between men and women. I think it's very important to be aware of the fact that we are institutes of higher education. We are we have these values which are very much and should be in our heart and in our mind. Perhaps we should more discuss it, just to talk about it. And also, don't be afraid to say to somebody that you should respect people which have a different, which are homosexual. You should respect women, etc., etc. So it's very much important, especially from leaders of these institutions, to talk much more about these basics. Now, to your question, that's a very difficult one. First of all, I would be interested in where he's coming from. You know, it's not so that everybody from Pakistan will leave this country with a lot of knowledge about nuclear weapons or whatsoever, but they did in the past. So being open, not naive, is to invite him, to talk to him, to try to understand him, to try to sense what's the motives of the man, and try to perhaps look at this. I'm not telling that we have to profile all of them, but also to try to find out, did he go to Stanford, did he go to MIT, did he go to whatever, instead of some kind of obscure university. I don't want to name I don't mention the name of the country, because it's an international conference. So I think it's very important also with respect to students. Connect with them, talk to them, try to find out what are their basic values, try to find out what are their motives, try to understand people. It's very important that we try to understand people, and then we minimize the risk of making a mistake, and there's still a possibility of making the mistake. If my institution is an institution with an open pedagogy, with an institution with teachers who know this city deep down in the brain and in the heart, and they make judgments, and one of these judgments are wrong, I have to stand for it, you know. I have to explain to you, I have to explain to the parliament, we did our best, and something went wrong. But I think the margin of things going wrong is lesser when we keep intervening with these people, when we keep talking to them, when we try to understand them.
Well, in addition to what you're saying, I think it's very true that you need to make it more explicit about your values, but also give boundaries and say, this is the boundary you do not, this is the line you do not cross. Because it's not always nice to have all kinds of respect for every individual.
No.
You also need to set the boundaries, and
Agreed.
even for young people, especially for young people, it's needed, but also for professors and scientists.
Yes,
experienced.
I agree.
But it's, I agree with you. I also agree very much with what you said, Ron, about that it's so important to keep the dialogue and also to keep questioning things and to start from the values. We started the whole project of education and higher education centuries ago. And sometimes we might almost forgot that, fighting against all kinds of international, national threats. And we have to keep in mind that, as I also said earlier, that there is one sector and one institute that should be open and should have the dialogue day by day, hour by hour, should be education, and I think especially higher education. And that means that you also have to show interest in the individual of your students or your lecturer or whatever, and not see them in the first place as a member of a group, but to see them as someone, a man or woman with some other education, with some ambitions, with some challenges. And that's quite a lot of work, I think, if you don't want to be naive at the same time. So you want to have a kind of risk research or profile. And on the other hand, you don't want to see them as a member of a group. So you also want to support them. And if needed, for, as Ron Bormann said, also to maybe to support them with extra care or attention. So how do you organize this? Do you have special departments in your universities, or do you have a chief diversity officer in Vrije Universiteit? Do others have kind of diversity or safety officers or departments, or how do you organize this?
Yeah, we have a safety coordinator, but that's more focused on the physical safety. This other element that you mentioned, the element of personal attention, treating all students as individuals and paying attention there. I think we have our study coaches, but for us it's also a matter of responsibility of the management of every single faculty. And program, because I think it's very important that students are seen as individual users of an educational process, and as long as we are able to follow the students in the individual study path, then the risk can be minimized, I would say, and we don't treat them as a group.
Others?
Yeah, I think it's maybe wise to make a distinction between students indeed and staff. For students, like I said, we have these mechanisms going on For staff, I think what universities typically do is hire very talented people coming from everywhere and bringing their own intellectual knowledge to the institution. And I think departments and institutions within the universities have to arrange meetings among the staff members, I think, and in order to make them feel at home. And sometimes I have the impression that we can do a little better in that respect, to be honest.
So something to work on. I don't know how much time we have yet.
We still have a few minutes.
Still a few minutes,
Yeah.
okay. I think one issue that puzzles me is how we cope with everything that has to do with social media and with the internet. And also that links to the question, how do you relate the responsibility within the Institute of Education to personal lives and experiences, because you cannot control your students and lecturers 24 hours a day. So how do you cope with that, and how do you cope with the issue of the internet? Marjolein, I know you have you are a specialist in cybersecurity, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of specialists.
And we say hello to the mayor.
Well, I think it's very important also to focus on awareness. We can set in place a lot of measurements to be cyber secure, to have all these kind of data protection systems. If a data leak is signaled, I get informed within 5 or 10 minutes after that it's signaled. And that's good to have, so I notice where the leak is, and then there are measurements taking place. But it's on a behavioral element. And I think the cyber world is at close length of the real world. It's for the young students, it's the same world. For us, it's two worlds, but they have this Android person. They are connected to their iPhone, and if they lose their iPhone, they really do not know where to go. So it's their own world, and you have to get a dialogue on privacy, get them aware of what you post on the internet can be easy, but there are real people also on the internet. And if you connect the people behind these posts and behind Twitter, then you can bring them into contact, and then you get this dialogue. And perhaps the next time they will think twice before posting a tweet. So I think it's almost the same way of addressing these issues of respect, because the cyber world is a real world.
But Ron, how do you cope with this problem? You must also have a lot of students who might post things on their personal accounts you wouldn't like, and maybe that even would cross the boundaries we just mentioned.
Yeah, what's very important is what is the difference? What is the definition that what I don't like? You know, because we live in a free society, and people are allowed to say.
Okay, but when is it freedom of speech and when is it hate speech? That sounds very dangerous.
Well, when people say stupid things about that everything in the world is a complot from the Zionist movement and from Israel or whatsoever, when people say stupid things about our Muslim community or whatsoever, then sometimes we pick them up, these signals, and I think then the same procedure has to be be in charge. Try to come and connect with these young people. Why you're saying it is because you are young and you want to. It's a provocation, and you want to be. You want your 5 minutes of fame or whatsoever, or is it the beginning of a kind of radicalization? Is the beginning of a kind of thoughts that might be harmful? And we have had these cases last year that we thought this. Now we're dealing with someone who perhaps might take the next step.
But do you make a difference between, for example, hate speech or something like that within your institute, or within emails with your institute's name, or private mails? So when do you call the mayor, and when do you think you have to solve the problem yourself?
I think when I say here that I read private mails, I have a big problem. So the mayor is in the room. But I think that it's on the internet. We don't have separate identities in terms of that. Me being Ron Bormans as a person, me being Ron Bormans as the president of the University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam. On the internet, you have your own identity, which is a mixture of all these formal identities. And when people are saying things, they have a large amount of freedom to say things. It's not to me to judge on them, but when a student from the University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands begins talking about in a way that he's radicalizing, in a way that he is saying things about which I think, well, it's not pleasant, we should try to come in contact with him. We should try to find out whether he is still going to school, whether there's still a contact in the school, and whether there are people in the school who he trusts or whatsoever, and try to find out what's going on. We are teachers, and we should try to teach them as teachers. And on one day we have to say, well, now it's enough.
Okay.
You stop radicalizing, because you become a danger, first of all, to himself or herself.
Yeah. So we should.
I'm also the chair of the meeting, and so
Yeah.
I'm
so
in a
we
double
are
role.
now,
So you have to finish.
We have to finish now. That's just what I wanted. What I wanted to say, Ron. That's a very nice conclusion. That we are all teachers.
Yeah.
There are no managers here or presidents. Maybe there are also managers or presidents of an institute, but in a way we are all teachers. Even me myself, being a minister of education, I'm a teacher, and I think if teachers has to do one thing, that is to communicate and to listen to your pupils and your students, and to be in dialogue about not only day-to-day measures or policies or whatever kind of technical problem, but also about all moral issues of today and tomorrow. So let's keep that in mind, and thank you very much.
Thank you.